Greetings, greenhouse people. We're back at it with another episode of Tech on Demand, brought to you by the fine folks at Grower Talks magazine. If you don't receive Grower Talks and Green Profit every month, it's time to head over to growertalks.com and subscribe. The magazine's been a pillar of the industry for more than 75 years, and it's about time you join the club. And speaking of subscribing, be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite podcast app. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Odyssey, and more. If you have an extra minute to leave us a positive review, that would be awesome. Every little bit helps our algorithms and allows us to reach more greenhouse professionals. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and this is going to be a two-part episode focused on biocontrols, bios, biologicals, beneficials, or however you want to refer to biosolutions for the horticulture industry. And it's the first in a series of podcasts spinning off from the 2024 Grower Talks Biosolutions Guide, which is a special supplement. You'll find a link to the guide in the show notes. My guest for the next two episodes is Jeremy Weber, crop team manager at Koppert, a Dutch company that's been innovating in the biosolutions space for more than 50 years. Koppert is a global market leader specializing in biological crop protection, and Jeremy's been with the company for almost 15 years and is well-versed in all things biosolutions and an excellent speaker, so I assure you, this will be a fun, dynamic dialogue discussing why growers are seeking biocontrol strategies more and more, the best gateway pests and bios to start with, how to approach the conventional versus bio cost discussion, SOPs for a few different common biocontrol scenarios and pests, what every grower should do on Fridays before leaving the greenhouse, why nematodes always work on fungus gnats, eyeless, dumb, predatory mites, and much, much more. But before we get started, let me run through Jeremy's bio because it'll give you some insight into why I was so excited to hear what he had to say about such a wide range of topics. Jeremy entered the northeastern nursery industry in 2003, ultimately leading production efforts as a director at Sunny Border Nurseries in Berlin, Connecticut. He's unsure how many plants he's grown or sold. However, he estimates he's killed at least 1 million, and he's good at learning from his mistakes. For the last 13 years, Jeremy has been hyper-focused on the intersection of growers and plant pests and diseases, working for Koppert US. He manages the cannabis and ornamental crop team with 12 consultants located throughout the country. So without further ado, let's get into part one with Jeremy Weber from Koppert. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really stoked to be here. It's going to be fun.
For sure. And you have so much experience, whether it's with biocontrols or in the greenhouse, that I think this conversation should be excellent. We'll probably go in all sorts of different directions, but why don't I start with what's kind of your expected first question, which is, tell me a little bit about Koppert as a company, how the company started, some of the products or I guess specialties of Koppert, and a little bit about how the company evolved in terms of the crops or markets that you work in.
Okay, so that's about a 20-minute answer. I'll try to keep it concise.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we started over 50 years ago. So Jan Koppert was a cute grower over in the Netherlands, and he was getting sick from spraying spider mites. So he heard about this predatory mite and went and found one from a research station, and it actually started to work, and it kind of blew his mind, and he was going, all right, I'm going to produce these for myself, but man, I could probably keep going. So we were the first company to commercialize biocontrol. We began the industry, so to speak, and he was selling Priscillus reared on his cucumber leaves in paper bags to his neighbors and his friends that were all growers. So that was really where it started. And then his two sons, Peter and Paul, and then his nephew, Henry, grew up in the greenhouse. And then they took the company and really made it into what everybody knows Koppert is today. So, in the Netherlands, to those of us that have been over there, it's easy to see why that's where the industry worked. It's a whole United States state of greenhouse. And that cuke industry, greenhouse tomatoes, greenhouse peppers are really where everything found its initial foothold for the first couple of decades. And that's a ton of just the bio industry's history is right there in the Westland and in those really just those three crops. And then the next stuff to really get added were the cut flower industry, where you've got, can you imagine trying to grow a Gerber for 3 years?
Wow.
Or a rose for 7 to 10 years, in one of these greenhouses. And that was the next spot where it was like, man, we really, the pesticides aren't working. We need something else. So that was really the advent of ornamental biocontrols. We're in the cut flower greenhouses over there. And then, as the Dutch are wont to do, they're not just their products are exported, but so are their ideas in horticulture.
Right.
So we found a lot of initial foothold where a lot of those guys actually immigrated, which was southeastern Canada and Ontario there. And that was about the time that I started to come onto the scene to some degree or another. And we were really just starting to figure out what biocontrols looked like in ornamentals at that time. And still to this day, I'll always credit most of my initial successes to being able to lean on our Koppert Canadian crew, where they were doing a lot of that initial groundwork and going from cut flowers to, all right, how do we make this work in hanging baskets? And that was, that started 15, 17, 18 years ago.
Okay. And that's interesting, because when you think about, countries that lead in sustainable production biocontrols, I do think of Netherlands and Canada. And then it's slowly making its way through the US, but that's interesting that Koppert sort of started that market and drove it through those countries.
Yeah, and I mean that there were certainly some others that popped up right after us. So we've certainly got some competition that had developed very quickly there. But regardless, that Canadian influence for us here in the U.S., at least for me personally, has been a huge help, because they had to trailblaze that. Right. And, Koppert Canada walked so that Jeremy could run.
I love it.
A lot of hard learned lessons that I was able to fall back on there, and just had to trust somebody when I started. Right. And those guys were a great resource.
Makes sense. How about Koppert's overarching mission? I know we've talked a little bit about this. I think it's certainly admirable and a great kind of North Star to direct yourself toward. Tell us what Koppert's overarching mission is and why it's so important to the company.
100% sustainable global agriculture. And that's not, I don't think any of us believe that that's actually achievable. Mm-hmm. So I think pinning down what the heck sustainable even means is, that's a whole other podcast or four. But, really what we're trying to do is say, all right, that's the North Star. That's the lens that we make all of our major decisions through. And as long as that's our goal, then we're going to be the company that we want to be. And we're going to be making the decisions and the impacts globally that we're trying to make. So that's a huge part of it for us. It's just saying, look, how do we make what we're eating, what we're putting into our houses for decorations, in some cases, what we're smoking, or eating, or however you want to look at that too. How do we make that as safe as it possibly can be for us?
And if you had to throw a crazy number out there, where are we at? What percent of global agriculture is sustainable?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not even qualified to make a guess on that one. We are working on that. We do have a team of people that are trying to quantify what our global footprint is, like what we've actually been able to do for the planet, right? In the 56, 57 years, whatever it's been that we've been here, because that is something that we're hearing that from clients, right? Not just how do you measure success? There's a billion different ways to do that, but there's so many additional benefits to using this sort of approach, and how can we put all that together? Because it's very nebulous. It's hard to pin down. So that's something we're actively working on, trying to come up with something, because it's not easy to definitively say that.
I didn't think you were going to give me a percentage. I just figured I'd throw it out there.
I like to say I don't know as often as possible, because often I say I do know a pretty good bit, and it's a nice contrast.
Well, I've got one that you can definitely say I know to, because it's more about you and your approach. So we've talked a little bit about some of the formalities, core values of Koppert. I'm interested why you feel ornamentals growers should be moving toward a bio-based approach to production. And you already said the word, I think it's an important word in this conversation, is trust. And when you work with a biocontrol supplier, advisor, anyone in that role, a lot of it is about trust, like any business relationship. But why do you think ornamentals growers should be exploring or moving production into a biosolutions realm?
I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons, and that's why we're seeing the industry growing the way that it is. It's not just one thing. We didn't just make pesticides illegal and you guys have to talk to us. Yeah. There's a lot of things going on there, but coming at it rather selfishly, it's worker safety, and it's going, okay, I was in the greenhouse for a little over a decade, and prior to that I was a landscaper. I've been around pesticides a lot longer than I've been in the greenhouse, and it didn't bother me. And then one day it did, and I went, oh man, I need to go get this freckle looked at, and I need to go get that freckle looked at. And man, my asthma's been crazy lately, and that's really what got the wheels turning for me. And then also I'm spraying bifenthrin on shore flies and they're not dying at max label rate, and I'm like, maybe now it's time. And, I kind of always look at things through that lens of going, okay, how can the 15 or 20 people that are working in this range, how can we make it safer for them and more enjoyable for them to be at work every day? And then there's all these other environmental things after that, and, you name it. But man, if I can just help people not be around acephate, pyrethroids, OPs in general, I guess, carbamates, to me, that's a really worthwhile career goal. For sure. Our work is directly making people's lives better and more safe. Not many people are blessed enough to be able to have an impact with what they do each day to me, to that level. So that's always what I'm shooting for.
Very, very, very true. I think our industry has a responsibility in that regard too. We have a lot of workers in greenhouses, and the safety has to be of utmost concern and a priority for every operation. Talk a little bit about the trust element of working with a biocontrols partner or any partner.
We talked about that a little bit yesterday, and it really got me thinking about it more. And it's so far beyond that. It's a life skill, and it's you don't have to be able to trust people. There are a lot of people that I don't think are just wired that way or don't want to be, and that's fine. But, when really took over more of a management role over the last 5-6 years. And, to me, this came back to when I'm onboarding a new employee and we're bringing somebody new onto the team and going, look, you've never done any of this really, it's easy for me to recommend an application of Endeavor because I know it kills aphids in about 4 days or whatever. I've done it a million times personally and I've seen it. Sooner or later, you're going to have to come in here and tell somebody to do something that you've never, ever done before. So to me, it really brought it back to that level personally with me where it's like, yeah, I always have to try to convince our new hires that we're not full of crap. I need you to take this SOP that we've written over the last 20 years and go tell this to a client and trust that it's going to work.
Right.
You have to believe in that. And the same thing applies for the client and the advisor relationship where, you really have to go into that and say, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. And you have to be comfortable saying that and meeting it and saying, but I do trust you. Where do we start? How can we ease into this together so that I can still kind of sleep at night for a little bit and I don't have to worry about my plants being thrown away? So that's really the key, I think, is for anyone that has not done this yet, that wants to get into it, you have to find an advisor that you trust. I would love for that to be someone from my team or from my company in general. But there's a lot of other people out there, and we're obviously not going to be a perfect fit for everyone. So
Right.
I think that's the main thing, because it is so nuanced. If you could put this on a spreadsheet, then I don't have a job and I'm not paying for my mortgage for the last 15 years doing it.
Right.
And we wouldn't have 100 people in the U.S. doing it either. So it requires that specialist touch to some degree or another. And you're not going to be as successful as you could be otherwise. If you're just going in on your own and forging your own path, and all right, sweet. That obviously is a path that a lot of people like, but it's going to take you longer. You're going to fall on some avoidable pitfalls. And I think finding that person that you're really able to connect with, that you trust, and, helps you deliver results. Personally, for me, that's mission critical.
And then, so a little bit about your journey to why you feel it's important, and your years in a greenhouse, and then working with growers around the world on these products. How about, let's look at this question in a little bit different angle. Like I said, you've been at Koppert a long time. You've worked with a lot of growers of all operations of all sizes. Why are the sessions at trade shows, and if the listeners are listening in real time, we've got Cultivate coming up in less than a week. And there's a lot of sessions on biocontrol strategies and conventional chemical strategies. But why are those sessions at industry events always packed? And why is that barrier kind of coming down, and growers are looking at Biosolutions, with sort of a hunger these days?
I think time normalizes things, and coming into this 15 years ago ish, into that space, it's still very, and to an extent, it still is viewed as a hippie thing or a crunchy granola thing. And, with each passing year, that gets a little less prevalent, and it's I can never tell if logarithmic's the right word, but it's really, I think it's a logarithmic growth scale where it's really possible that you're a grower, and out of your friends group of 3 or 4 other growers, 1 or 2 of 3, or heck, maybe all of you have had success with that now. And 10 or 12 years ago, it was a handful of people that probably half the industry thought were wing nuts. And I say probably. I have a lot of respect for the original pioneers that did all this stuff on their own. It took more guts than I had. I'll put it that way. So I definitely respect it. But, I think at this point, it's just normal. You can come by and talk to us at our booth and not be embarrassed if somebody walks by and sees you talking to us.
Gotcha.
And it's time. The other thing, too, is we've gotten better as an industry. We're not throwing stuff at the wall anymore to see what sticks. And I don't think, for my company, I can say as a whole, we're not good at throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. We'll do a very dedicated trial on something that we don't know what, if we've got a new thing on a new thing and we don't know how it works, we're not just going to be like, yeah, put this in every week. It'll probably happen. We're pretty good at saying we don't know things when we don't know them. But 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot of stuff we didn't know about ornamental production.
Right.
How difficult aphids were going to be. Aphids are really difficult in ornamentals, and anyone that tells you otherwise is selling you something, unless you're using Rycar. But in general, it's I think just time and experience.
Well, and I do think that there, like you said, the stigma of trying different bioproducts is almost gone. And you're right. A lot of growers work in peer groups. And whether they're looking at new LED lights or they're looking at biocontrols, there's someone in that peer group who's tried it and has successes to talk about or failures to share. I think you're absolutely right on that. There's a lot of new technology coming into our industry, and growers are looking to each other to figure out, who's tried what and what's worked. Then they're off searching for more information and working with companies like Koppert who have expertise in this, and not doing as much trial and error probably.
Yeah, 10, 12 years ago, you'd be hard pressed to find a major greenhouse in the United States that was doing more than just nematodes. You really would have had to look, and now it's completely the inverse of that, where you can't walk into a major greenhouse operation and not find a biocontrol program to some degree. And in a lot of cases, it is darn near maxed out.
Right.
And
I'm starting to see head IPM managers from huge greenhouses doing the sessions at trade shows. They're the ones that are talking about the strategies. Whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was always companies like you guys who had the experts up there talking. And now it's coming from the growers as well, which is exciting because I think it just shows a level of knowledge and experience that's a lot of times how we learn in our industry.
And I'd much rather have one of our growers doing the talk than me.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not I'm a consultant or a salesperson. I'm a consultant first and foremost, or I'm never going to be a salesperson.
Yeah.
We have to operate on, in that level. I'll always be perceived as a salesperson.
Sure.
By people that don't know me anyway. It's
right.
like, oh, that guy sells bugs. Yeah, on paper, I guess I kind of do, but if we just sell bugs to sell bugs, we don't do it for very long.
Exactly.
And, for me, converting as many people as possible to this is always the goal. So it's way better for me to just shut up, stand in the back and let a grower do the selling instead of me.
Well, and getting to that point, I personally know just enough about really horticulture and production in general, but even the bios, just enough to be dangerous. I've been really digging deep into it the last few years, and talking to a lot of growers. And when I do that, I hear a lot of questions. So I'm going to throw a few of them at you, if that's cool, and just see how, because I'm sure none of these are new to you. You've heard these questions from growers in the past. So you good with some rapid fire questions? I'll
just qualify it with the devil's in the details. True. So if your question's not specific, I'm going to hammer you until it is. So let's go.
Well, that could get ugly because I don't know enough to probably get that specific, but I'm gonna try. I hear a lot about growers who will say, I have a bio program, but when things really get out of control or infestations get so high, I've got to go to the conventional chemistries to knock it down. Because bios need to be established over time. What's your response to that?
I can pick that apart about 10 different ways. So,
sure.
It depends on the crop, right? So if we're truly talking ornamentals here, we have the widest range of active ingredients of any developed country on the planet. You've got a lot of options, and a lot of those are relatively new. The stuff invented by my granddad's generation, we want to keep those out of the equation. But anything that came out in the last 10 or 15 years, there's a good chance that we can throw that into the system at some point to keep the bio costs lower than they would be otherwise. We're not trying to grow a pansy organically here. We're just trying to reduce risk to workers and give you a solution that lasts forever. Where, what if, this 4A stops working or whatever? Yeah, who cares? You can go to bed at night knowing that you've got a solution that lasts indefinitely on your poinsettias, for instance. So, can we mix pesticides with that? All the time. And I think that's a really healthy way to look at it in ornamentals is do we want to do routine pesticide applications of a rotation of insecticides? No, your plants hate that. They don't want it. They'll grow better without a routine weekly application of an insecticide. Let's put some bugs in there to keep you below a given threshold. But let's not put so many in there that you break the bank trying to stay below that threshold all the time. Let's say, hey, there's this one peak week where I do fog the house with Ricopher aphids or Altus or mainspring, or I do a drench of mainspring. There's all kinds of stuff that we can use with this. And, for me, that's why ornamentals are so much fun is there's a billion ways to skin the cat. And again, you can't, no one's been able to replace those with a PDF or a flowchart yet. Because everybody goes into this with, I hate mainspring, it's too expensive, or neonics are fine, I don't give a whatever, and you never know what you're going to run into. So, you talk to people and they're like, they give you that set of rules that are on the table, and then you just help them put that puzzle together. And pesticides are frequently a part of that.
Makes sense. It's sort of a combined approach.
100%.
And like you said, keep it below a threshold. You don't want to come in week after week with a pesticide application when you can, certainly work on those populations with something else that's safer for your workers, no REI, that kind of thing.
And I think, the devil's in the details. So, routine biopesticide applications, huge fan. For me, that's been a huge thing. Sort of another topic, but, I don't want to say all pesticide applications are bad. I traffic in living solutions, and I do not have a problem with repeatedly applying fungi and bacteria. Right. Those things actually seem to do a lot of good for the crop versus, I'm routinely applying an EC based product. Well, your NGIs are going to hate you. Mm-hmm. You'll probably ship them, but you're going to ship them an inch smaller than you, and that's really where this starts to get a little, a lot more fun. Right. When you see guys go, is it normal for me to finish 2 weeks before? How many times are you spraying? Twice a week. Yeah, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
And it's, hey, by the way, I had to use more PGRs this year. Thanks, dude. Got that one before too.
Right.
Well, you weren't spraying an EC once or twice a week.
Yeah. And something that you said when we were talking leading up to this discussion was that if there is an infestation that's to that level, then something bigger is going on, right? There's a problem with your protocol, and that's probably something to get to the bottom of before you even try to figure out how to knock it all down.
Yeah, and that goes back to another point that I had from your original question was, about establishment. Mm-hmm. And establishment is in a lot of cases, and again, like there's so many different scenarios here that you could pick apart what I'm saying. So like, don't. But, in general, one of the things that I like to impress on people in ornamentals is that establishment is bad. Now, if you're running banker plants that, we don't really recommend bankers because they're too variable in how they perform. But there are people that have made them work, and it is a lot of work to do that. But the people that have made them work, kudos, because it's hard to pull that off. But okay, in that case, establishment's great. You're establishing on a non-targeted pest species, but if you are establishing predatory mites in a crop of ornamentals without supplementary feeding, you're feeding them pests, and you have enough pests to completely ruin your crop. So what we want are really limited little tiny pockets of establishment, maybe where, Swarovski is in this crop of potted Gerber. They eat a couple of thrips. You get a little hotspot that was going to develop, and instead Swarovski developed on that hotspot. But it's not widespread, and it didn't last for 2 months.
Okay.
If we have widespread development, especially of predatory mites in your crop, you're firing us.
Okay.
Because
crop. The pests are there because you're not eliminating pests. You're breeding mites on pests.
And that's really this, it's everything in life is managing expectations, but this is one of those critical ones where it's like, look, we're not trying to establish some hippy dippy commune in your crop. Mm-hmm. We're trying to flood it and bring a shotgun to a knife fight. And when one little thing starts, there's 15 emaciated near-death predators that have not had anything to eat in their entire life, and they squash it immediately, and it's over before you ever knew it happened. Okay. That's how you produce an ornamental crop with bios with crystal clean foliage. Mm-hmm. If you want to develop a bunch of bugs in there, well, you're going to have a lot of food, and that's
what we're trying to avoid.
Have fun with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's really the mindset that I like to establish there is 99% of what you buy from us hopefully dies of starvation.
Got it.
But then again, 99% of the pesticides you were applying went on the foliage or the ground and did nothing because there wasn't a target for them either. It's just as inefficient as preventively spraying pesticides onto a mostly clean crop.
Okay. That makes sense. I've never heard it explained that way. That is very clear to me. And I think that's something that the listeners will understand as well.
Well, if your cut flowers are fun because you don't really care what the leaves look like. Mm-hmm. You do
Right.
to the extent that you want the plant to be healthy and produce stems. But if you've got some leaf miner tunneling and a gerb, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But then you get the same question of, well, why can't I use diglyphos in my potted gerbs? Because it actually parasitizes the bug after it's made tunnels.
Yeah.
So you're going to have tunnels in your crop and you're going to have to be picking leaves. Oh, by the way, you can't spray anything around this bug ever or it dies.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to ship the crop. So you got to spray something for leaf miner. Sorry.
Okay. No, I think.
But that's where it's really fun when you get into that scenario where the leaves don't matter as much. Then you can start to relax a little bit. But when it's a potted crop, you've really got to go crazy.
Right. And speaking of managing expectations, what about cost? Because, of course, obviously, this is going to come up in most discussions about anything that you're using in production and applying. I mean, we're not working on huge margins in our industry. So how do you compare conventional chemistries and bio-based approaches? And I know, again, that's probably not a nuanced question, but it's got to be one you've heard before. And I'm sure it's not apples to apples when you're comparing something that you've done traditionally versus a new approach. But cost is always a consideration. What do you discuss with growers when you have that meeting and that question comes up?
Well, I mean, expensive is different for everyone. And
True.
I think that's the first thing that we want to pin down is go, well, what do you mean by expensive? Because and this sounds like some salesman Jedi mind trick BS. I know that. But the answers that we get to this question reinforce why we ask it. Because you'll find out that you pitched a crazy expensive, $100 and something $1,000 poinsettia program to a grower. And you're like, this is insane money.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, yeah, we signed it without thinking about it. I spent $50,000 on PPE for that crop last year and I don't have to do it this year.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Who's ever dropped $50K at Gimpler's? Well, people do.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that was even a thing, so there so many of these times when we ask that and go, well, what's your budget for the crop?
Yeah.
Look, if it's $2,000 and my solution's $10,000, then keep doing the $2,000 solution. I think that makes perfect sense, assuming it works and you're happy with it. But most of the time when we're talking to people, they're spending $10,000 and they're not happy with what they're getting for $10,000. And we're going to go in there, for example, and say, I'm pretty sure we can do a heck of a lot better than that for 11, and it's close. We can't, the industry can't explode the way it has over the last 6 or 7 years if we're that far out of whack.
True.
And I think that's a really great way to put a really fine point on it is to say, look, ornamentals as a category are exploding in with just the entire biosolutions industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because we're twice the cost of what you're doing already.
Right. Well, and then there's the other costs. Yeah, and then there's other costs that factor in. We talked yesterday when we were planning for this about the cost of, or the value of reducing an REI, or the value of worker safety alone. You really can't even put a number on it, but there's a lot more that factors into the overall cost of a program than just, what does that bottle of chemical cost and what does this, package of bugs cost?
There are some cases, poinsettias are a great example where we say, look, you were probably spending X amount per acre. We can probably tie that and you won't have REIs. Or whatever. So there are certain cases where we can do the apples to apples line item cost comparison and it's close enough to where everybody's like, oh, okay, sweet, let's try it.
Okay.
And then there are other cases where we were talking about this a little bit yesterday with like stock plants. You really have a very clear way of measuring how happy that plant is. IPOs are my favorite. IPO stock is just made for bios. And it's really crazy to see, oh yeah, we were spraying twice a week all of last year. But this year with your program, we increased our cutting production by 76%, and you're like, okay, well, what was that worth? How many greenhouses did you need to build to create that using your old system? What did this approach for probably about the same cost? What did you get from it?
Mm-hmm.
No one's really marketing it yet either, but like, why aren't we really aggressively? And we've got a couple guys that we work with that, put a postcard in every box of flats they ship, which I think is awesome. But, at the end of the day, you can market this to end users. You can market this to even from wholesaler to wholesaler,
Sure.
and you can recoup some of that cost there as well.
Mm-hmm.
REIs in a prop house.
Yeah.
What does it cost what are you saving by not having any in your busiest season?
No, it's true.
And one of the better examples, we had a guy that had three shift a day loading dock all spring, 24-hour a day loading dock, and a whole 40,000 feet of baskets over the top of that.
Mm-hmm.
We did Callies and petchellas with no aphids for 4 years.
Wow.
Because they couldn't drip. They couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm like, let's throw the worst crop in there. Let's just see if we can do it. We never charged them. That was a trial. That was not a demo. That was throw something at the wall here and see if it works. And we brought a shotgun to a knife fight. All right. And it worked very well.
Well, and I think that anytime you're having a cost discussion, you have to try to explain all the different things that add into that. And it's not, and I'm sure it's a challenge. I'm sure that you and your team, you've got experience overcoming that barrier, but I'm sure it's something that you guys deal with all the time. And I'm sure that you have plenty of examples to show your customers and growers why these solutions make sense.
Yeah, it was a lot. That was where the trust came in a couple years in, and was going, all right, I trust that this Dutch guy, this Canadian guy that I'm leaning on for all this information is correct. And, am I as convincing when I'm 99.9% sure? Apparently not. Now I think that's a benefit of working with any seasoned veteran or veteran team at this point.
Right.
Is that this is all we do. Like to an extent, I can walk into a greenhouse and in terms of pests, we very definitely see the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're paying for, I think, when you're working with a service like us or any of the other guys. Is you want somebody that can walk in there and in 5 seconds go do this and then watch for this in 2 weeks.
Yeah, this is where you're at. This is where you can be.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
And to me, it seems extremely easy, but I forgot I don't have to deal with all the other stuff I had to deal with as a grower. I just have to think about breaking thrips life cycles all day,
right.
And I did that for 5 years. It was all I thought about.
Yeah.
I can do it in my sleep,
yeah.
But I don't have to think about fertility mixtures. I haven't had to change a seal kit on a dosatron in 14 years. There's all this other stuff that goes into that grower position. And I think that's really the value that we bring is going, look, if you want to offload this onto us, you can.
Right.
If you don't, that's fine too. But we can really back you up with a high level of support there and say, look, do this, and this. It's on you guys to execute. And based on what you told me your goals are and what tools we have in the toolbox to play with, you're going to be a very happy person in 5 weeks or tomorrow or whatever that is. And that's, I guess what being hyper-focused gives you.